All right. Well, we'll go ahead and move now into our main conversation for the day. Today, we are going to be having our second of two kind of community meetings together, talking specifically about this transition we are embarking on as we carefully begin meeting together in person once again after more than a year. So as a reminder, let's go ahead, Brent, and show our upcoming schedule for the coming weeks, which is coming there in the slides, I believe. If you want to go and show the next one. I think I put it in there. Oh, no. Okay, maybe after the text. Sorry. There we go. Perfect. I'm sorry about that. So here is our current schedule, just as a reminder of kind of what we're looking at present, that we are going to be gathering here today in Zoom. Next week, we'll have a week off as we kind of gear up for the transition. And then we're going to be having a week in person / in Zoom as well, hopefully. And then a Zoom only service, and then another week off. And then we kind of fall into what we're hoping to be kind of our regular rhythm for the summer. So it'll be through June, July, August, we'll have the first Sunday off of the month. So the 4th of July, we won't be meeting, etc. But then we'll have a hybrid service, hopefully, followed by a Zoom only service, followed by a hybrid service, and then a week off. So that's kind of the rhythm we're moving towards, okay? So Jeannie's going to lead a good chunk of our discussion today, but before she does, I want to start by sharing kind of two brief stories that I hope might frame our conversation a bit. And both of these stories come to us from the Gospel of Mark. They're stories about the life of Jesus that appear in Mark's Gospel, just verses from each other, pretty close together. So the first one takes place in Mark 9. So you can read along on the screen with me. Then they came to Capernaum, and after Jesus was inside the house, he asked them, "What were you discussing on the way?" But they were silent. And they meaning the disciples, for on the way they'd argued with one another about who was the greatest. And after he sat down, he called the 12 and said to them, "If anyone wants to be first, he must be last of all and servant of all." And then he took a little child and had him stand among them. Taking him in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me."
And then I also have one right here.
Skipping ahead to the next chapter, Mark relates a couple of other anecdotes, and then he shares this story, picking it up in Mark 10 with verse 13. Now, people were bringing little children to him for him to touch, but the disciples scolded those who brought them. But when Jesus saw this, he was indignant and said to them, "Let the little children come to me. Do not try to stop them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. I tell you the truth. Whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child will never enter it." And after he took the children in his arms, he placed his hands on them and blessed them. All right. So here we have these two little moments shared by Mark, very close together. So they're stories that seem to actually be working together for Mark to communicate something important to Jesus's followers. Specifically, these stories seem to be telling us something about Jesus's view of children, a view that would have been surprising and counterintuitive to his closest followers. Our first story starts with a bit of a gotcha moment between Jesus and his friends. Apparently, Jesus's buddies were in a bit of a tiff about which of them was the most important, and Jesus calls them out of it, right? So when he's asking what they're talking about, they get all sheepish. No one wants to volunteer, right? Because I think they know that their conversation is likely something Jesus isn't going to endorse, okay? They feel a little embarrassed, but Jesus seems to already know, without them saying anything, what they were talking about. He knows his closest followers, like most of us human beings, are concerned to some extent with social standing, with status. They want to know they matter. They want to know they're important. And often the way that we humans do that is in relationship with others. It's just such a human way of finding security, right? But Jesus wants more for his followers. He doesn't value them with the same metrics of human society. He's more interested actually in subverting the social order that uplifts some by oppressing others. So to make his point, he reaches out and he draws close to him, a person who ancient society would have put pretty much at the bottom of the social hierarchy. He brings into his arms a small child. And as he draws the child close, he says something that was likely mind-blowing to his friends. Whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me doesn't welcome me, but the one who sent me. In other words, he's kind of making this argument, if you follow the logic. When you welcome a child, the lowest of the low in our society's framework, when you welcome this child, you are actually welcoming the divine. To welcome the child is to welcome God. Friends, he's saying, if you're looking at the top of the social ladder for divine reality, the top in that world meant being a successful adult male. He's saying, if you're looking at being one of those, if you're looking there for God, you're looking in the wrong place. But Jesus's followers don't seem to get the point. Okay? Just a few paragraphs later, there they are, scolding the parents and caregivers who are trying to bring their little ones to Jesus so they can be blessed, so they can be healed. And again, these followers of Jesus are probably doing what societal norms would have taught them. They think they're protecting Jesus's important work by clearing away any annoying distractions. But Jesus doesn't see these kids as distractions, keeping him from his work of sharing the good news of God's gracious kingdom that he is here to enact. Because in his mind, these are his kingdom's best ambassadors. Unlike those who've been socialized under the empire of Rome to seek value through power, through dominance, these children find value in their network of kinship. They receive freely from their beloved caregivers because they know they have need and they know they are loved and they will be provided for. This too is Jesus's hope for those who follow him. It's his hope for all of us that we could receive freely from the divine and one another, not because we're so important in the things we do, but because we are sacred. We all matter. We are loved just because we are, as the scripture says, children of God. I start with all of this as a setup to the conversation we want to have today, because truthfully, we've now been meeting for about 14 months exclusively online. And because of the nature of these Zoom gatherings and just the challenges of virtual church in general, our gatherings have been pretty much a grown-ups only space. Our community has really struggled in this season. And I speak to some of my clergy friends, and it's not just us, like across the board, I think faith communities have struggled to really care for and resource our children and families through this season. But as we begin to gather in person once more, if we are to live into a vision of really cultivating a safe, diverse, Jesus-centered community, then that means we need to cultivate a space where our kids can be part of the diverse group of people we're creating safety for. This is not just a project for parents or caregivers or those who have a particular heart for kids. As Jesus makes clear to his followers in both of these anecdotes from Mark, this is an important call for all of us. To welcome the children is to welcome the divine. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn things over to Jeannie, and we're going to talk more about what welcoming the children in our community might look like as we begin to reopen and rebuild. So Jeannie, why don't you take it away?
All righty. Thank you, Leah. Thank you for letting me have the opportunity to speak to you all about the children and youth here at Haven. And thank you, Leah, for reminding us what the scripture says about children and the divinity in children as we welcome them. So as we transition back to in-person gatherings, I personally have felt a lot of pressure. I would say mostly self-imposed, to have a plan for what we will have for the children and youth. I hear you, parents and guardians and caretakers, and I understand that this last year was difficult, beyond difficult. It was disruptive and challenging, to say the least. And as we step into the reopening phase of Haven, I feel the sense that there is an expectation for a bit of relief, remedy, or programming for the children here. And I think as an educator, I had that sense too, as parents were sending their kids back to school. There's that sense that these parents wanted, well, one, a good education for their kids, but also the relief and remedy for those kids to continue learning, programming, a good education for them, so to speak. So I've been listening to y'all over the last few weeks, some of you individually, some of you as a group, some of this came up last week. But here's what I've heard over the last few weeks, some of the expectations or the hopes that I've heard spoke. We want Haven to be a place where the children and youth are cared for. We want Haven to be a place where they are taught about Jesus, that there's a space for them to build relationships with each other. And there's a place in church for them apart from the adults. And there's this hope that we can have events and gatherings outside the Sunday experience. And that this program or whatever we build will be a place where they really want to come to. We also want it to be a place where families feel supported, a place where families feel connections and share in their caretaking journey with one another. A place where other adults in the community can see and care for the children. And a place where everyone is helping out with the children and youth. And lastly, a safe and diverse and Jesus-centered program. Man, when I made that list, I thought, man, this sounds good. It sounds reasonable. But honestly, that's when it felt like, oh my gosh, this feels like a lot. That's where that self-imposed pressure came from. I felt that there was this need for programming and I internally started pushing back with that thought, because programming, production, performance feels like a white supremacy construct, which I don't want to be a part of. But that in no way means that I don't have a hope or a vision or a dream for our families and children here. I would like to have all these things for the families, but I don't want to program without considering the culture and ethos that we will be creating. In November 2019, before I was even on staff here, is pretty new to Haven, I was asked to speak and help create a vision for Haven children and youth. You see, at that time, Jill, who was working with the children and doing godly play, was getting ready to step away from Haven into the next place in her journey. And Sylvia, who was working with youth at that time, also transitioned out of her role. So I was stepping into Haven at a time where there was structure in place. There were kids in place. Back then, I looked at the stats. We were averaging 14 kids and youth on a Sunday. And I told Leah, I don't want to come in and be the youth and children's youth minister. I've done that. I did that for over 14 years at another church. But I could help bring leadership to this area and help create a culture or ethos around the children and youth at Haven. And I wanted to share and remind you a little bit of what I shared that Sunday morning. I talked about seeing the children and youth in a new way and what intergenerational church can look like. I talked about the tension that we as a community, we as families, we as a faith place where we're growing children, that we have this tension. We want our children to grow up with the knowledge and faith, but we don't want them to learn the teachings that we kind of grew up with, that we felt that were toxic. And we want them to know the Bible or Bible stories, but without that patriarchal narrative. And we want them to understand the deep, deep love of Jesus for their lives from a place of original blessing, but not necessarily from a place of original sin. And we want their faith to be real and dynamic, not a prescription of rules to follow. And as the structure was set up, we would say, have our music, and we'd say, okay, and now the kids are going to Haven Kids, and the youth will go downstairs. And by just saying that and sending them to their prospective places, we were sending them to a classroom where hopefully they were getting all of their spiritual teaching. But I argue that it can't just happen in a 30-minute space on a Sunday morning. It's going to take a lot of intention from all of us. If we want our children to have a faith, a spiritual journey that beckons them deeper, then it will take all of us investing in their lives. We, the adults in this space or in our in-person space, have to set the example. We are a small community. There are fewer children right now. So I think it matters even more that we do this communally, that we bring the children into our spaces and we enter into their spaces. And that Sunday, if you remember, we brought the kids into our space, into the main adult space, and we led a godly play experience. And then the adults got to experience some of the hands-on stuff and activities. And that was an example of bringing them into our space. Right now, as we step into in-person gatherings, we are not at that same place we were in March 2020. We don't have the resources, the spaces, volunteers, and the children that we had. And so over the next few months, we will be gathering in what we are going to call intergenerational space. I also spoke about this that Sunday morning. What does an intergenerational space look like in a faith community? Well, and Leah's like, tell me what it looks like. I don't know. There's no formula or right way to what it looks like. And it's more of, I just feel like it's more of this ethos or culture that we're creating. It's not just about programs, but it's just this place that hopefully will live out in each of us. I want to set our intentions of what it means to be intergenerational, because over the next month or so, until we figure out what is best for families and children, we will be having children in our adult space with us, and we have the opportunity to explore and create and birth something really beautiful. So to remind you what intergenerational means, I have 3 things. Intergenerational means creating a culture here where each one of us, not just the parents and caregivers and those who love kids like me, but each one of us has a responsibility to care for these children. And I know if you're thinking, oh, I don't like kids, or I'm not good with kids, and go on and on and on, it's not that hard. It's really easy. If we just take time to say hi to the young people when they're there, get to know their names if you don't know them, and just see them. I was noticing on our opening prayer, where we create space for, and we did those binaries, we didn't put age on there for young and old. But hopefully that is part, even though it's not stated, that we can welcome young and old into our space. And it's easy as building relationships with them. Who likes to eat ice cream? So do the kids, right? Who likes to play video games? So do the kids. Who likes to eat? So do the kids. And if you guys are looking at Whit, he is raising his hand on every single one. And if you like any of those things, that's so easy to do with them. Right, Whit? Yeah. Teaching and learning can't just happen on every Sunday for 30 minutes. It's going to happen in our daily lives when we interact with these kids. The second thing about what it means to be intergenerational, it means taking the posture that we can learn from each other. We can learn from the children as much as they can learn from us. Maybe this is me, but I love learning from kids, and they teach me constantly. I'm an educator, and I promise you, as an educator, they still teach me. This past week, I was teaching them combining like terms, and I wrote it all out on the board. And this one student says, I don't see it that way. And I said, come up to the board and show us. And oh my gosh, it was brilliant. And I said, can I show all my other classes what you just said? He's like, only if you give me credit. And I'm like, I will give you credit. I will give you credit and let them know that you thought of a better way to do this. And it was brilliant. But not only do they teach me in the classroom, they teach me about God. I remember teaching kindergartners, you know, and they just have this energy that they can do anything. If you say, who can help me lead this song? Their hands go up and they jump in front of the class. I'll lead the song. Who can draw this picture for me? I can draw this picture for you. Who can lead the class and whatever? They think they could do it all. But somewhere along the way, we kind of grow up and we get this self-conscious thing that we can't do these things. But I've learned from children that that's what God desires in us, that we could live from that free space of letting God be God in us. So we can learn from children just as much as they can learn from us. And the third thing is seeing that having each other in our lives makes us better. Having children in our adult spaces really do make us better. And I know when I stated this back then that morning, and I know when I state it now, this one might be a hard sell because this year, long pandemic and all of the struggles it entailed. And it's like, man, I want the gathering space to be a church and being a place for a respite for adults. I understand that. But I would never want to be part of a faith community void of children, or where children are just programmed away out of sight, because they are the life, they are the heartbeat, they are the joy of the space. So I challenge you this morning to shift your mindset and live from this place of abundance. A place of abundance with children, what does that mean? It means seeing children not as annoying and tiring and bothersome, which sometimes they can be, but seeing children as an amazing, amazing miracle of God. Because they exude divinity, they exude creativity, they exude love and joy and purity and hope. And when we bring kids into our adult space, we bring in the divinity, we bring in creativity, we bring in love, we bring in joy, we bring in hope and purity, and it's all with us. I dream of a space where we see in each other the divinity, not in just ourselves as adults, but in children as well. The last time I gave this talk, when I shared that vision, I ended with Psalm 139 to challenge us to think of children in this new way. It says in Psalm 139, for you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. And I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well, that I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Our children are fearfully and wonderfully made. And I was thinking about this. We are all children, right? We were all born in our mother's womb. We are all wonderfully made. And I looked up the synonyms for wonderfully. And this is the way I challenge you to look at yourself, which it's even hard for me to have self-compassion, but look at yourself this way, but look at the children this way. They're wonderfully made. They are astounding. They're wonderfully made. They are astonishing. They are awe-inspiring. They are awesome. They are breathtaking. They are extraordinary. They are fabulous. They are incredible. They are marvelous. They are phenomenal. They're remarkable. They're spectacular. They're stupendous. They're supernatural. They're unbelievable, and they're unimaginable. Those are just a few of the adjectives that describes a child of God, a child like you, like me, and the children around us. You know, I really struggled about sharing today because so much of the way I see children is so deeply a part of who I am. Working with children is my happy spot, is where I find joy. And I thought maybe this is just my strength and the way I'm wired, that it's my dream and my vision and not necessarily yours or even Haven's vision. But I want to invite you into this vision to share it with me. I invite you to imagine with me a new way of being church, where we all have this sense of responsibility to nurture these children with God's love, where we look for noticing God's presence in their lives so we can learn from them about the mystery of God, where we understand that we are only better with having them in our spaces and lives. Let's create a culture at Haven where community means intergenerational, not just while they are with us in our adult spaces, but at all times. So what does this look like practically? Well, our first few gatherings back will be intergenerational. Leah will speak to that in a bit. But in order to go forward and create a space for the children, I need your help. I can't do this alone. And besides having the mindset that we are all responsible for children, I need people to do this with me. If we eventually want to create a space for the children, I'll need volunteers. I'll need volunteers to help me with the children. And I keep asking myself, where will I get these volunteers? I hope that the parents and caretakers of the children will be in a volunteer rotation and help give back to the kids in the community. And I also hope that others who may not have children can still step forward and be volunteers in the rotation in the community. And if we're only meeting twice a month, it really is not that a huge commitment to step in to love on these kids. What I'll be working on over the next few months is setting up guidelines for anyone working with children, such as the background check. All of ours are out of date, so we have to update those. And I want to provide training, so it's not like, oh, what is it like watching and being with the kids? But I want to provide training and what it means to see these kids as beloved children of God and what that space could look like. And then I've talked with the youth. What's going to happen with youth? I've talked with youth in regards to the youth and their needs. I don't know if they all want a teaching space right now on a Sunday morning. I literally got from one of them text, what do you think of Sunday morning gathering coming back? And there's a big And then I said, well, what about if we create a space where we can go to lunch afterwards or have an outing? And they were all down with that. So I hope to create spaces for the young people, the youth, where maybe we're having lunch with them after or planning activities, which Kim and Sylvia did last weekend with the kayaking trip. And I thank you for that. And so if we could continue those spaces. So what I shared with you was a lot of information. If you have any questions or want to talk about kids and youth, later when we do breakouts, we're going to have a youth and kids breakout, and you could join me in there and we could talk a little bit more about that. Or you can always email me or call me or Slack me. But right now I'm going to turn it back to Leah, and she's going to kind of tell us and inform us and give us information about our next gathering, which will be in person.
Ooh, it's crazy to think about it that way. But it is true. Goodness gracious. So, okay. The first thing I will name is, as Jeannie shared, obviously, like, there's a lot of work to get from, kind of this, what we're doing now, to something beyond, and something that we hope may exist at some point, of an in-person with virtual element that has space for the adults to have a gathering, and places where we're all together, and places where the kids can have their own space and kind of live into their own faith development and have their version of the space that is Jesus centered, with loving adults who are excited to be there with them. But that's a journey, right? And it's probably not something, even if we had all the volunteers in place today to make it happen, it's not going to happen overnight. And the same with, if we waited 3 months, it's like we still need to kind of take the steps to make that possible, one way or the other. And so part of that process, Jeannie didn't mention this specifically, but part of the training will also be regarding COVID protocols. And thankfully we have somebody in Jeannie who's been doing this with kids at a school in person for months. So is very familiar with how to do that with kids in a safe way. But we don't assume that any of our volunteers are going to have that same confidence. And so that will also be a part of the training we need to be able to do. And so with all that in mind, our current hope is that it potentially, if we have enough volunteers who are open to being able to be a part of a space with children, perhaps in July, we could begin. And so that's kind of the goal right now, is to get some volunteers on board so that we can start that, the training, the conversations around what that space will look like, all of that with Jeannie, that she can have some folks to start preparing for that. But we're not going to be able to have it in 2 weeks. It's just not practical. And I think it also is this opportunity for us to do some things differently. And we may learn some habits in this season. We may try some things. We may have some experiments that are just unique to this season. And we also may have some things that we decide we love and may be part of the life that we have building forward. And so what we have in mind at this point is that our first 3 hybrid gatherings would definitely be intergenerational. So we will all be together. I will show you some quick images because we do now have a sense of where we're going to meet at the space. So Jeannie and I went and met with Albert, our friend, the custodian at Washington, who's still going to be our contact there, still be working with us. So we went and looked around the outdoor space to try to figure out kind of an optimal setting. And we have decided that I think this picnic tables area right in the front is probably the best space for what we're hoping to do at this point, at least to get started. As you can see, there's a bit of shade, which is nice. That being said, it's not all shaded. So, if you have an umbrella you want to bring, we may have a couple of, somebody mentioned last week, potentially bringing like a pop-up shade. So we might try some things like that. But we do at least have some shade. Probably the way we'll set it up is you're looking at from probably like myself, any musicians, kind of the front of the space will be kind of where you're looking out from the front kind of now, or where Jeannie's standing in that photo. And then this will be kind of, as you enter, kind of the rear of the space. The nice thing about, you can't necessarily see in these photos, but when we were there, we did notice that all the tables, as well as much of the ground, has already been marked with distancing markers set up at 6 feet apart, so that there's literally dots on the tables that tell you, if you sit here, you'll be 6 feet from somebody. So that part is also very nice, is that the school has kind of already done that work for us. And, we like about this space, not only is there access to electricity, which we will need to have a small sound system to be able to broadcast on Zoom, etc. But this space is a bit sheltered from the kind of the rest of the of the grounds. It's kind of its own little space between the stairs and the ramp that we think could work well. And this space also, I think with the tables does make, so we'll have the tables, all use that for seating as well as set up some chairs. And the idea is that could also be a space that I think could work well with folks of all ages. And we'll be looking for ways we can use the tables, we can use the space to kind of allow for some intergenerational activities. So we will not be in the playground area. Albert did let me know that is the most busy area that we should expect on Sunday morning, that there will probably be people coming through to potentially use the playground. And it is not closed to the public. But people are welcome to play with their children, to take their children to the playground before, after the gathering, hang out afterwards. Probably the gathering itself, on these weeks we'll be intergenerational, we'll be more on the brief side. I'm estimating an hour or so, probably not a lot longer than that, on these weeks where we're all together. The caregivers are going to be responsible for their children before and after the gathering, as well as during. Remember, the guidelines for the children will be that they're masked, no touching other children outside their homes. We're going to be observing social distancing. And we're going to be asking all adults to keep in mind that the children watch the adults. So we all need to be modeling that protocol. And, you know, in these early gatherings, I think especially this first week, we probably won't even do communion. We certainly won't be providing snacks for the kids. I think at the very beginning, we're just gonna, knowing that people's comfort levels are in different places, we don't want to do anything that includes food consumption as part of our gathering. Though I think, you know, over time, as we get a little more comfortable, you know, that might come online, but probably right in the beginning, not. So yeah, just some other details. Like I did mention where we're going to be located. If it's not obvious, I mean, I think anyone who's been to Washington recognizes this space. It's pretty much right outside of where we generally would go inside to gather. So you just come in the same entrance. The parking lot should be available to you as well. We, like I said, we'll have the chairs set out for social distancing. That's why it is going to be important that we get RSVPs as much as possible for our Sunday gatherings. I'll just remind you, the survey we're doing now is not a formal RSVP. It's more of just a help us know kind of when you're thinking about coming, because that gives us a sense of like, okay, how do we structure the gathering? If we know some families will be there, if we know kind of how many people, you know, how many safety monitors are we going to need? We're supposed to have 1 per 12 individuals. If we have no idea how many people we're talking, we can't really schedule those things. So it's very helpful to have a general sense from this current survey. And then in a week or so will be the week of any particular gathering. There will be a form to sign up to come that Sunday. And that will be helpful. You know, Albert needs to know he has already offered to bring out as many chairs as we need, but we need to be able to give him a number of, we're hoping we will probably get a need about 10 chairs in addition to the tables or whatever it is. And so, so as much as possible, we would love to have RSVPs probably by the Friday before the Sunday at the latest, so that we can plan kind of what we need for that given week. Again, it is not, we are not going to turn people away at the door. We said this last week. If somebody happens to walk by, if you have a friend who's visiting from out of town and all of a sudden they're like, I want to come to church with you, or whatever it is, or if you just happen to not remember, like, we're not going to turn people away, but it's very, very helpful if we can plan as much as possible in these early gatherings, particularly. And we do need to have lists for social, for as part of our protocol of everyone who is in attendance, because everyone needs to be screened, everyone needs to be on a list, so that if, you know, hopefully this never happens, but of course, if there was an outbreak, we need for contact tracing purposes to be able to contact everyone who was gathered there. And so rather than having to do all of that the morning of, it's super helpful if we just have a list to work from because we already had the RSVPs. So naming all of that, questions have come up around bathrooms. We will have access to the bathrooms that are right up at the top of those stairs in the gathering. If needed for accessibility purposes, we'll also have access to the other door that will allow, you know, a wheelchair or other mobility concerns can come through and around to a bathroom, or we might be able to access a bathroom that's closer. Bathroom protocol, I think at this point will be one person at a time goes to the bathrooms, and or household, you know, parent with a child going to the bathrooms. Other things to keep in mind, just in general, this is going to be our first real gathering in person. And we need to be mindful of the fact that people are going to be at different comfort levels and anxiety levels around what it even means to be in a group of people and follow all the protocols. So some people maybe have been going to work in person for a while. Some people maybe do, like Jeannie, work at a school. Or maybe you've been taking your kids to school or to other children's activities and have started to kind of get a little more comfortable with these things. Maybe you've been vaccinated for, fully vaccinated for a month and have started to kind of, gather with people socially, but others of us have not. And we're not going to assume, and we do not require that everyone who attends is fully vaccinated. And because we're an intergenerational space, we know for sure our youth and kids won't be. And so we're going to take protocols seriously, and we want to just be really sensitive to the variety of places people may be, without anyone feeling pressure to be somewhere that they're not. And so we'll just remind people to continue to ask consent. Is it okay if I sit close at this place to you? Can I give you an elbow bump, or would you rather not? And all answers are okay. I'll also speak, people have asked about, going out to lunch afterwards, which has typically been an important, kind of haven practice and something we every Sunday have invited folks to do if they want to. And at this point, we will say, obviously, individuals are welcome to do what they want to do on their own time and space. And some people are already doing that, and that's fine. We won't have an official, we're inviting everyone to lunch, recognizing that not everyone might be there. But of course, if people would like to organize something and do that, they're welcome to do so. Okay, questions about just the general structure. I'll just try to give you a sense of what we're thinking. We will have musical worship. That'll be an important piece. We'll look to have a short message. So we will have some teaching, but we'll be keeping it brief and hopefully engaging for the variety of people in the space. We'll try to have an interactive activity each time. And we'll try to have our breakout groups. But again, those will be all kind of intergenerational in these early gatherings. So we'll do our best to keep everything as engaging as possible for everyone who's there. And there will be some movement in the gathering. So there might be some places where we say, okay, we're going to break into breakouts. So some of the chairs are going to move and those kinds of things. But we will, as we do those things, we just want you to be aware that that may happen, but we want you to know that we're going to be, carefully watching the social distancing and making sure everything stays safe. And that's part of why we have our safety monitors there as well to help with that. I think those were my kind of formal things to name. Jeannie, do you see any things I missed that you want to highlight?
I don't think you missed anything. I think that was great. And like I said, when we do breakouts, people have more questions, we could talk there.
Okay, so does it seem like we're ready to move into that time now?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions for breakouts, but I think the thought was that we would go ahead and once again have 2 breakouts, kind of a choose your own adventure space again, where you can decide you can decide which of these, feels like you want to be a part of it. These questions can be reflected on in both. How can you imagine living into abundance as we transition into meeting in person, like Jeannie was talking about, and how can we transition well and be mindful of all the needs of the community? So those are things that we're thinking about in either space. But I think if you're interested particularly in zeroing in on some of how this all relates with kids and youth, either because you're a parent and you're wondering how you're supposed to manage this, or you're a caregiver, or you're interested in kind of being part of really helping lead out in that, you want to go and talk with Jeannie and her group. That am I right, Jeannie, that you'll host that one? And I can host the other group that is more just about wanting to, you've been thinking about everything we talked about last week and or weighing stuff and would appreciate just more space to process, not necessarily about the kids and youth piece, but just kind of in general, how are we thinking about this stuff? And so we can talk about these two questions or anything else that is on your mind. I do see, Ginny, I'll go ahead and address the question in the chat real quick. What are the roles you all need for us to fill as active community members? If you take the survey, there are many roles on there because there's lots of places that actually we really need support. We're going to need volunteer help putting on the service, from the setup to the, you know, like I said, there's safety monitoring. There's help we're going to need to make this a Zoom friendly space as well. There's help that we need obviously with the kids and youth. Lots of options. And so that is part of all the other reason we really want people to take it. Now, obviously, you know, you don't have to volunteer in order to attend, but right now in the early months, particularly, you know, we really are limited in what we can offer based on what, you know, what volunteer support we have. So anyway, yes. Okay. Sounds good, Ginny. All right, so let's go ahead and offer those breakouts. Of course, as always, you're welcome to not join a breakout. You can just hang out in this room. We'll be in the breakouts for 15 minutes, and then we will come back for worship.